On the 14th of July 2003, then President Mary McAleese signed the Official Languages Act into law. And now on the line is Éamon Ó Cuív. Éamon was the senior government minister who dealt with most of that then legislative process more than anyone else in government at the time. Éamon, welcome back to Near FM.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Éamon, for those of us who are around 20 years ago and interested in politics, you are credited more than anyone else for bringing in the Official Languages Act, and you may deserve that credit. But it will be true to say, I believe, that you were working with a lot of other people, both inside and outside of Oireachtas Éireann, on that whole legislative process for a few years before 2003, weren't you?
Well, that's correct. When I became Minister of State in 1997, one of the first tasks I set myself was to introduce a Languages Act. Now, this had been mentioned round in Gaeilge circles as far back as the early 70s, when I had been in Dublin. So I was aware of the concept. And when you look at the Constitution, it specifically says that the use of Irish or English, or both, could be set out in law, and it more or less invited such a law. And amazingly, no Language Act was in place, and therefore people were not clear as to what their rights were, and the only way they had been determined was by the courts, and that's not a good way for people to have to set rights. That's a much better way for adjudicating rights and adjudicating the law. But in the absence of law, they were trying to interpret a constitution in the courts, which is not really the role of the, in other words, when there was an invitation to have a law there, it was important that the law under the Constitution was being what was interpreted, but there was a huge vacuum there because there was no law.
And in particular, you were working on this area from 1997, were you?
I was. So basically, it was one official in the department did most of the heavy work. And I used to meet that person every week, and we would sit down and discuss the progress. So they developed it. Now, of course, in the department, once you start developing anything, it goes up the ranks to the principal officer and to the assistant secretary and the secretary general and so on. But I was working directly with this person, and I kept myself abreast of all the developments. So I was in the department in 2020, or till the year 2000. And in the year 2000, I was transferred over to the Department of Agriculture. But I came back as the senior minister in 2002. And basically, it took a little over a year, just over a year, for us to complete and enact the Official Languages Act 2003.
I believe that Dinny McGinley, the former Fine Gael TD and Minister of State from Donegal, was the Cahiarlach of the Oireachtas Joint Committee that dealt with preparing for the Act as well, was he?
He probably was. I'm not sure. Oireachtas committees didn't have the same role in those days as they have now. But he probably was the chairman of the committee. And I was in and out of committees all right when we were doing the Act. But in those days, there was no pre-legislative scrutiny. All you had was the committee stage of the bill as taken in the Dáil, done in committee stage. But the rest of it was done in the Houses, and there was no pre-legislative scrutiny.
Okay, and in some areas more than others, bringing in the Official Languages Act has really had a transformative effect for the Irish language on Irish society or the Irish state, hasn't it, Éamon?
Well, it had, but it was never worked to its potential. There was a lot more in the Act that was never implemented, because the Act was like an open book. It gave you the power, for example, to bring in regulation in relation to advertising and so on. And it was only after the passing of the amended Act 2 years ago that advertising was regulated for. And you can see the effect of that on television and radio all the time, where a certain percentage of advertising, of public advertising, now this only relates to public advertising, has to be in the Irish language. And that has made a significant difference. So, yes, certainly it did make a difference. But unfortunately, it wasn't utilised to its potential, and I regret that. But the other thing it also did was, since all you had was a line in, one provision in the Constitution, which by very nature of it is not specific. What it did was it put flesh on what are your rights and what aren't your rights. And in my view, it took a lot of angst out of being a Gaeilge, because you knew what you were entitled to and what you're not. And if you felt you had been deprived of something you were entitled to, you had recourse to the Commissioner of dTeangacha, who would then vindicate your right. And I'll give you a simple example. Every citizen of the state has the right to write to any state service in Irish and expect a reply in Irish with the same speed and the same amount of detail as they would get in English. That's a fundamental right. And if they write to you in English only, as a reply, that's against the law. On the other hand, if you write in English, they can't write back to you in Irish. So they must write, in other words, the consumer is the king, and they must write back to you in the official language in which you write into them.
Yeah, I think it's great that most new bilingual state signage nowadays, and for many years now, is bilingual, with the Irish language words being printed as big as the English language words. This is fantastic, I think, and we have bilingual Irish English other services as well in many other ways. Like take, for instance, the automated bilingual announcements on Dublin bus and bus Éireann buses and Éireann Road Éireann trains. I think all these are great things. I just have one or two more questions, Éamon, before we discuss the 2021 amendment of the Official Languages Act in a minute. Okay, just to talk about the overall Act over the last 20 years, are you disappointed that road signs on main roads are still not covered by the Act? And are you disappointed that most of the public health service is not great for a bilingual policy?
Well, obviously, with exclusive road signs, which has their own peculiar and particular legislation, all of the signs are in public bodies, including the health service and so on, are covered under the Language Act. And so would be, for example, recorded messages and so on. And that has had a huge effect. And the great thing about it is you don't have to be going asking them time and again. That's the law. If they don't comply, you can make your complaint to the Commissioner. They'll fight your cause for you then, and they'll be on the right side of the law. So it has had a very significant effect on the visibility of Irish. As we know in more recent times, the rules in relation to advertising through Irish as well as English have been very, very effective. And you see that and you hear that on radio and television all of the time. So these things are very, very effective. Interpersonal services are a lot more tricky for a whole lot of reasons. In some cases, it's difficult to get staff with Irish, particularly if you're talking about specialists. So it is complex and much more complex when it comes to interpersonal service. I am disappointed that there wasn't a more focused and strategic approach to that. The language planning that was provided for under the 2003 Act was meant to deal with that issue. But to be quite honest, in the intervening years, we were making great progress, and then it seemed to come to misquote my late colleague Brian Lennon, to a shuddering halt in the last decade when the downturn occurred, and it had no connection with the downturn.
I'm just thinking, as regards the public health service, I don't know a lot of hospitals going from experience, but my knowledge of my nearest hospital beside me, Connolly Hospital in Blanchardstown, over the last several years, the signs on the actual campus itself of the hospital, most of them are bilingual, which is great, but from what I know, internally in the hospital, the vast majority, if not all, of the signs are just in English. I'm just wondering, from a logistical point of view, if you think we would ever see change on this, and in relation to road signage?
Yeah, well, they're two separate issues. In relation to signage, anytime you replace signage, it had to be bilingual and in compliance with the Act. And I think, as far as I can remember, there was also a date by which, if it didn't have to be replaced, that signage would have to be replaced and made bilingual. So that was very well catered for and will, fully be implemented in time. One of the things, of course, is when you're introducing change, we used to do it on the basis of when the change was taking place. And the argument in favour of that was most signs only have a certain shelf life, but you didn't want to be accused of wasting a lot of money ripping down brand new signage that had been there before the Act and replacing it immediately with alternative signage. So that was the reason for that. I think, on the other hand, that we say Dublin Airport is a very good example of very, very good signage in the Irish language. And the other thing that was important, and you're right about the road signs, the thing that was important is that having experience of the road signs and the rather farcical situation with road signs, we insisted that the Irish was on top and in as visible, at least, ink and colour and size as the English language version. What happened on the road sign is historic, and there's an awful resistance in the Department of Transport to changing it. They use Italian script or a slightly slanty script and a slightly smaller script for the Irish. Now, what they must think is that Irish speakers have much better sight than English speakers, because obviously the block upright script is easier to read at a greater distance, and it's slightly bigger, therefore it's easier to read and see. And that's not equality. The funny thing is, if you go to Wales, and none of us have any difficulty or find the roads in Wales different, or up in Scotland, you'll find that they're the same size, Irish or English, or in Welsh or English in the case of Wales, and it doesn't seem to cause any difficulty, and all the arguments being put up by the Department of Transport do not appear to hold water.
Okay, Éamon, to move on, the biggest policy at the heart of the 2021 amendment of the Official Languages Act is that there will be, by 2030, a policy of 20% of new public sector and civil service jobs going to qualified Irish speakers. With the decrease in the number of Irish speakers we have had in the last two censuses, and bearing in mind that we have a shortage of second level Gaelscoill or Gael Cláistí, do you think, from the point of view of government and people who support this policy, that the 20% policy as of today in 2023 looks pretty embarrassing in terms of trying to attain it by 2030?
I thought so even at the time we were enacting it. I was wondering, were we very ambitious in view of the inability of the state to get down to the job. Now, there was a committee set up, but again, we're moving on, time's moving on, and we still don't see the results. What we need is at primary level, secondary level, and third level, that's university level, we need to see a comprehensive plan of education so that the educated people will be there to take the positions, many of them which will require a high education, university degrees and more, who will be competent at doing their business in Irish. Now, of course, when you say we want 20% Irish speakers, we want 100% who are able to talk English. And we want 20% of those to be bilingual, Irish and English. That's the reality of it. Sometimes when we, as Irish speakers, talk about Irish speakers, you think that, we didn't expect those people to be competent in the other official language. Of course they must be bilingual, and that's what's expected. So it is, in my view, as we sit here today, an over-ambitious target. I always worry about over-ambitious targets because we just get into denial land rather than dealing with the problem. And we do need a very comprehensive and proactive policy to ensure that this policy is implementable without freezing up the whole public service.
An carthúla déag de bhío sa bhliain gábhlín is a trí shínigh Uachtarán Mary McAleese Acht na dTeangacha Oifigiúla ina dhlí. Agus inis an lína tá Teachta Dála agus Iar-Aire Rialtas a raibh an bhaint bhavó aige le teachtasteach na reachtaíochta seo Éamon Ó Cuív. A Éamon fáilte ras go dtí an clár?
Good morning, Margaret.
Okay, Éamon, fáin tú an taithint is mó thar ceann aon ar eile maidir le teacht isteach ach na dteangacha gábhain is a trí ó gine a bhí fásta suas a bhblionn gábhain is a trí agus a raibh sim acu sa reachtaíocht seo. Ach an mé sé fear a rá go raibh tú ag obair as lámh le chéile le neartdaoine eile taobhiste agus las an muid den a reachtas maidir le teacht isteach na reachtaíochta seo le roinnt blianta roimh gábhain is a trí?
Well, vi sin fear is scale costa reachtaíochta thuirteach. Another harlas a gasa na gur hannig me saxarine sem lien nedig nege schacht. Wie sam gur an swine seo man le reachtaíocht teanga. Chuil haar te blianta fada. Vi trolín te Jonacha a hoig an tuchtar an ish. Mi had die o higin is start nur vi schneide. Ach nu rein feimloop sin, maar nieti de kur wein, maar is vi de Jonach. Agus hín mé go mé cearcamach achtan, a leiceg síos cedíd na carta atá grach láfar na Gaeilge, agus scrífa na Gaeilge, agus ag go bobbal a gcuiteanna, madra sin Gaeilge, agus chomáile sin cedíd na carta nachhfuil acu, agus tin na sríomta atá ar a garta I dtíobh seirbhísí áil sa Gaeilge. Agus go mbeadh soléireachtáin, go mbeadh bailach éigean le de carta a chosint gan golig na cuairteanna. Agus de war sin swinu starte me go me ceartach Baile no achtanga an agus an oi is asin na daskar an commissioner teanga sin an dinne a chudoch ergahan damrode gur liku ein count gon na cuineach a ví san acht.
Tá mé go páirsanna ansáasta leis fómhór na nahra atá tar éis teacht a bhaim ó thaobh servicí dTeangacha sa sát omlíonn gábhain is trí a roiig. Deirfinn go bhfuil tú ansáasta leis an cuid is mó de na thara freisin ó bhfuil?
Well, tá sáasta na hara a hála ach tá díúmach nach near na bhd níos mú dul an cín le fihe blia. Agus vi me de bogerai go bra bonnie if ik een commissioner aanskopi agus is ma ane as dat diergaal rinne rachtiocht agus reelgein met de koerhiocht rather in antifriocht kuru voorallige bij met de koregres as ni forbri of na shervisi is a farsene sin goveta zomaal stakus fesoel mag dinegen sweet halwiocht we gaan aan play laten wegen no more hample count of Kurdsas Kumurham na an ri nasa húsiole agus na hifiki top play le public weltochta porbo moraku ni na Gaeilge. So near-Aire ling agus ni Aire Hagedisha na shervisi in the fashion a kurafai to Gaeilge. Tosaíonn beter gun darlo sin fin acht lesa ke goveti an fin blana teanga no fin plannen ni teanga vi get les ni teacht. At near lanu a raile as near find me of a tacht carteria.
Okay, Éamon, an macór ein winning no docus of a gwyn go vecimid policy co-status don gwega fud an sát am ochan seo. Like Tom McSweenif ó haibh go hair gná cóhrí boithre agus star loman aspa feicáíochta na gwega ó haibh cóhríochta san arná sáinte feibli ach go hairthe?
Well, kai ga kota nu ve ga hangach is sinne vaim o vi mismar aide sin gur som lia gavrile so mai a hannig sinne strakt agus vi gestam realachar en hortsak fi ogres egenam ach dieroch egenam sin dimme me as an rinus ko me noen go rinelle sin ko me noen go rin las a hoshale mar aide agus neer tugui chinnestrak ach sinum de gavli an den nuas agus na realachain mad le fógriocht dat an antifid go jo agus cushion to the second to fógri in Gaeilge a television agus radio agus na bhte a bhealach nachráil le feicáil go dtí seo.
Yeah, I'm se féin say an policy sin an policy is far hánig go mochas an lasú ar Athlone a cúpla bblion ó hain, you know. Okay, chun cainte mar dheala an mar bhí tú cainte sin an lasú a bhí ar acnaidanga ifcail cúpla bhliain ó shin, an sílan tú a Éamon ghuiil an spruc airgeachta fiche nua réadúil nó mí réadúil I gcóthach san aspas sa láthair atá a gcuin ar an mhuil scoilíochta ag an dar le bhéil an éireann?
Ceap mé an am gur sé thar bheith bisnúil agus dúlánach ach tá mé gaiirí an é dóchas go bhfuil aondal an cína dhéanana go stáid le go mbeidh dóhantaí an le fostal leis an ghaid go chuí. Agus is mór an tú de díomóid tá sin nig líon sa tír ach ní bhreaann sé go bhfuil an choras stáid agus go mór an choras asteachta stáid agus an rialtas sa gcuitina maid le cuasaí edachais bonscail, meascail, allscail agus mar sin de. Ní dóilm go bhreaann sé go bhfuil éon chuir chuige cóthairt acu le déanana cinnte go maiid sa láthair daoine an lena fostal ní hógaid. Ní léonha achta chuirta teacht mar in dionan tú an obair le déanana cinnte go féidir an tachta go bhhain go fuidife agus gan churas go rudaí eile. Another town, nuair a tosaigh bheith gobar ar nach, agus an óid nuair a thuig muid isteach an tAcht, hic muid nach raibh, ná a bheith sin deire an scéil, agus go bhfuil bheith tógáil ar seo, agus an rud a deirc mé se gcónaí, má tá bonsra hagad, agus bhí sé sin éin san afta 2003, bhí 8 an go Teacht I riamh. Tá an tógáil léir, agus an rud a deirc mé se gcónaí ná go raibh sé cosú le bréag an Lego sin a bhí sig na gasar, go féidir cur leis agus cur leis agus cur leis ach an bonsra a bheith hán agus tá sé sin éin inis.